is very much related to what Oldar was saying. Initially, this issue, the economic crisis, austerity, and the link to sustainable development, was part of the economic bloc. This year, for the first time, I decided to put it into the democratic governance, political aspects topic. I'm an economist myself, although I have also education in political sciences. My master's was on that. But it's not just the only reason. The reason is that I really believe that the economic crisis has very important political and policy and governance-related aspects, and unless we address them in parallel, at least, we cannot understand and cannot react adequately. So, actually, this lecture is a combination of economic and political science aspects. Maybe it fits somewhere in the field of a discipline which used to be called political economy. This is the outline. What I would like to talk today is first about the crisis. How does it look from sustainable development perspective? Second, I will focus on the debt spiral, the issue of debt, and how living with debt changes our behavior, both at the individual level but also at policy level. And in this particular case, what is the link between debt and consumer demand and sustainability? We were talking yesterday about the equation of implications and impact of human activity on dependent resources, and there is a direct link to this. Also, I would touch the issue of the dominating economic model and how dominating economic philosophy has implications for sustainable development, what is wrong with it, of course. And then I will move to the political aspects, people's growth, political mechanisms, and what is called the cracks in the traditional representative systems. I hope it will not be very pessimistic. The purpose of this is to encourage you to think out of the box and connect certain issues which are usually presented in isolation. Because I think a major problem of our contemporary thinking, not just in the area of sustainable human development, but in any economic, political sphere, is the lost ability to think and see the global, the bigger picture. So this is actually an attempt to sketch the bigger picture behind the apparently isolated issues. So let me start with the economic crisis. It's interesting to see what was the evolution of the issue in terms of media presentation, in terms of definitions. So if you remember, back in 2008, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, it was massively seen and analyzed as a mortgage crisis. So it was a mortgage bubble with basketball and all the related fancy financial instruments with debt package, repackaged, sold, resold, with no actual possibility of tracing who is borrowing from whom, who owns what is the real value behind this or that instrument, actually led to the financial meltdown. Gradually, the crisis started to be seen as economic. So in 2009, in 2010, there was increasing awareness that it's not just about mortgage, not just about financial crisis, it's something much bigger than that. And in the meantime, we were facing very interesting dynamics. It shifted geographically from primarily focused on the US, moving to Eurozone, which I myself find interestingly enough, somehow diverting the attention to one issue to the other, but also outlining some fundamental risks, both of contagion and also risks related to unclarity in terms of fundamental linkages between different elements of the economy. In the recent issue of The Economist, there was an interesting article which analyzes the economic contagion from region to region and country to country. using the methodologies of viral epidemiological monitoring mechanisms. So in fact, we are talking in this economic sphere also about borrowing techniques, analytical tools from different sciences, in this case, medical epidemiology. And a big conceptual issue which was on the agenda and still is on the agenda, is it a part of the natural economic cycle or something broader than that? Because in economic theory you have the history of economic cycles, periodical, there are normal cycles, super cycles, I won't go into this. But the point is that economic bubbles and busts are not something unique in the history. This is a long story of this. And learning from history of economic thought is indicative. And actually this is an important question. To what extent the elements which we are facing today are unique, or this is something which you have seen before but simply forgot. And of course the missing question which was still, which is still not on the agenda, how actually the economic crisis, the issue of economic growth, is related to the issue of sustainable human development. Why this last bullet is very important? Because still the debate is dominated by economical short-term objectives and short-term goals. We are talking about bringing the economies back on track, about creating jobs first and maybe austerity later, about absorption of youth entering the labor market, so to prevent from youth unemployment. But actually, in this very vigorous debate, we are losing the fundamental questions, the means and the ends. And I just put several bullets here. If you look in this list, which can be extended indefinitely, and think a little bit, what is the means and what is the ends? It's a very simple question, but let's go one by one. Economic growth, is it the means or it's the ends of something else? So what do you think? In my view, as an economist, I would say it's the means, not the ends. So there should be something fundamentally more important, which we should be keeping in the picture before talking about economic growth. Consumption, is it a means or an end? Maybe both. Maybe it depends on consumption of what? Consumption of how much? Just increasing the number of the calories and moving to obesity, perhaps it's not the correct way of interpreting consumption. Or buying another new model of this or that, new operation system of new computers, which basically do the same thing. So it is really a tricky issue. I mean, I don't think it's very often asked this question. Years of schooling, is it the means or an ends? And you go on and on, expenditure on health, disability-free life years, qualification, knowledge, skills, books, fun, a new car, even a bigger car. So all elements of our everyday life, if you go one by one. And if you try to think, actually, why do we want this? And why do we need to have the economic systems producing all this? Then you'll have a different picture. And this picture is still missing. In 1996, UNDP published a global report on economic growth, on the linkage between human development and economic growth. And I'm referring to this report because it's really important. At that time, it was a kind of voice in a very isolated manner. Because even now, there are not many voices claiming that actually not any growth is good. There are types of growth which are bad. Jobless growth, ruthless growth, which is benefiting mostly the rich. Voiceless growth, which is not accompanied by expansion of democratic mechanisms, expression and empowerment. This is directly linked to the topic today. Ruthless growth, which is at the expense of people's cultural identity. We tend to call this McDonald's culture or this globalization of cultural investment. It's not just that. It's simply going and often ruining traditional elements of the social system, which is not just economic, but also traditional values, traditional sources of income, and so on. And futureless growth, a growth at the expense of future generations. It's not just squandered resources, but also the debt burden. So all these elements of the growth, if you look now, you will very easily find them into the aspects of economic expansion. And when we call, let's have jobs first, and let's first put the economies back on track, and then maybe at some time when we can afford this, we'll move back to human development and sustainable development paradigm. This is all wrong. Because if we do follow this logic, we'll be most probably following these kinds of growth, which are very, I would say, far away from sustainability. And of course, the first bullet, economic growth, provides the resources necessary for human development. Of course, we need to have economic resources to afford education, to afford healthcare. I don't say that we should be living happy life in poverty. What I'm saying is that having the economic dynamics as part of our agenda, we should not be losing the ultimate ends and the objective which we want to achieve with that. And this is something which we usually exactly do. Let me now focus a little bit on economic and employment aspects of growth and related to the crisis. So we had in the last decades very interesting shifts in the global labor market. First of all, we have increasing global labor supply. Of course, it is not the case of aging societies like most of the European countries or Japan, but globally it is the case. We have a huge pool of young people entering the labor market, which actually need jobs, because we all know this is not rocket science. The theory is well developed in that regard. Being out of employment leads not just to economic losses, but to profound social losses in terms of fractured social cohesion and societal links. So, at the same time, we have increasing productivity per unit of labor because of capital investment, because of mechanization, new technologies, and so on, and we are producing more goods and services per one employee. At the same time, we have declining unit costs. The fact that today we can, each of us can afford several mobile phones is exactly thanks to this phenomenon that with the rising scale of production, the unit costs go down, and the chip, which was priced 5 years ago at $500,000, now costs $5 or 10. And another element, declining of manufacturing as a major employer in favor of services. Simply, we are producing more goods with less labor. Of course, it leads to comfortable workspaces for those who have the jobs. But what about the rest? And here is a very interesting phenomenon which usually goes unattended. Of course, the general theory goes that the shift of the labor supply and the labor demand will go from manufacturing to services, and that's what we are usually witnessing. But the question is what kind of services? Because not any service is related and contributes to improvement of human development and sustainability. Of course, we can have massive job creation exercise of training people to be, for example, hairdressers or car repairment technicians. But how many hairdressers can you have in society? So there is a limit, and unless you have this picture of the natural limits of this market, you can be a little bit off track. And in order to have this idea of the limits, you need to have certain anchors, and those anchors, in fact, can only be human development and sustainable development anchors. But there is one very interesting question which usually does not find the answer: where the demand will come from. Because, interestingly enough, when you look at all these nice things, what you have is decreasing level of labor employment in manufacturing, but the entire system is running fueled on demand. So there is a very simple chain. You go to shop with your dollars, pounds, euros, whatever. You create effective demand. The demand is transformed through the market mechanism into production. Production needs your job, and you are employed. So you are part of this cycle. And unless you have the effective demand, the entire mechanism is in fact stopped, blocked. And this is the logic behind all the intervention mechanisms and philosophy, that we should create the effective demand flood the market with liquidity so that we unblock the system. But there is a trick. And the trick is that usually it is done running on debt. And this is the second part, the debt spiral. I must admit that I may sound a little bit extremist in that regard because I am obsessed by the issue of debt. Happily, I'm not alone, although the economic theory in that regard is a little bit disbalanced. Most of the economists, to a certain extent, tend to side with the interventionist Keynesian or post-Keynesian philosophy, which has its merits and it is part of the important part of the economic theory. The problem is that today it is not very healthy and not mechanically replicable, and this is, I think, something which is missing. So a few words about the debt. I will show you a number of graphs taken from relatively recent publications, and because in fact this is a topic deserving a whole course, not just a few minutes of one presentation. So this graph shows the non-financial sector debt of OECD countries. From the beginning of the 80s, the most recent data is in 2009. In the red is the total, the green is the government debt, blue is the private, and the households is this one. And when you have it in real value divided by consumer prices, this is how it has grown compared to 1980. And here is the household debt. Does it show you something interesting? Of course, there is a progressive trend in increasing the debt stock. And from certain point on, you're not just obliged to service this debt because borrowing money costs, but also you are falling in a debt spiral. You are borrowing money to service your debt because you are not generating enough revenues in order to pay from the revenues. Why? It is in the next slides. This is the graph of the major debtors in Europe currently. It's 2011 data. It is the public debt, without the private, public debt of major European economies as a percentage of GDP. So Greece, which is now often occupying the front pages, is roughly 165% of the GDP. It means that the Greeks should be working more than a year and a half if they are supposed to pay their debts. What does it mean? It means that there is no other way except either to borrow more, but with this type of bad debt spiral and debt prognosis, there is no. It's not surprising that nobody is willing to pay to lend to Greece, and that's why the cost of paying this risk of losing the money is high. And this is the bigger problem. In fact, all the countries, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Portugal, the risk is not just the debt itself, but the fact that nobody wants to see them as a credible borrowers. There is a temporal shift from the demand side. It means that in the last decade, this is data from UK and the United States, the decade to 2010. I didn't update the data since then because there is not much change after the current crisis, but the beginning of the economic crisis. But you see clearly the explosion of private debt. And the explosion of private debt was exactly channeled through the mechanisms of mortgage financing, refinancing, and running this bubble when you nominally your house was priced more than it was yesterday, and you could borrow additional money for the differential and go on additional debt and go shopping, and the entire economic cycle is supposed to be no, it's not funny. Why it's not funny? Because let's come back again to Greece. This is an interesting article by Reinhard and Rogov, and actually, unfortunately, I did not see it quite well. This is the central government debt, domestic and external, of Greece, starting from the middle of the 19th century until recent times. And if you look carefully, we have been there before. Simply, somebody either forgot or doesn't care to remember. And if you look at the central government debt as percentage of the GDP, here we are now. And it is the shape of the curve resembles very strikingly the curve before the 1930 when there was collapse and banking crisis. And after the banking crisis, we had a period of hyperinflation, and in fact, in 2010, we are witnessing the same thing, banking crisis and near default. So, history sometimes tells us something in terms of possible options. This is a debt. This is the graph which illustrates the internal debts of developing or emerging markets, and the red line is again the percent of the debt as share of GDP. The blue bars is the percentage of countries which are facing restructuring or default, and the black, the countries which have systemic banking crisis. The interesting case is here that the emerging markets have been there until the 90s, and because this is, we are all from the emerging markets. We were all in this culture of mounting debt and hyperinflation, but Eurozone doesn't have now this option yet about hyperinflation. But if you see this small graph, is summarizing the situation in the advanced economies for the decade 1999-2009. And do you see the similarity of this curve? So in fact, the developed economies in this last decade is just repeating almost entirely the path which was typical for the emerging markets until the beginning of the so-called transformation from central planned system in our country, so Latin America with hyperinflation, with all these dictatorships and so on, in the 70s, 80s, and now. For me, as a political scientist and economist, because I'm the dual role here, this is a very worrying message, because in fact, you could see the similarities not just in the graphs, but also in the political response. Could be, and I think we should be careful about it. Another illustration, another graph, is the sovereign debt and banking crisis of the advanced economies, again in the last 140 years. And you see how the debt was spiraling, but also related, any spiral of the debt was very much related to the percentage of share of countries which were in default or restructuring their debts, or shadow restructuring. It could be either through devaluation or through currency change or whatever. Whatever it is, the mechanism results is that part of the society, in fact, loses the very leveraging mechanisms of savings or anything in order to put, as economists would say, put the economies back in structural adjustment pattern. But see here, what happens, 2010, after a small period of decline in the debt, it spirals tremendously in the last year. And in this square here, those are the years in which 25% or more of the advanced economies were entering their first banking crisis. Because those are the banking crises. After each banking crisis, there are usually a very period of severe either economic decline or recession or some collapse. And 2008 was, of course, one of those years. What is interesting here, what happens after the banking crisis, and we can extrapolate what would happen in the next years in that regard. I think this is the last slide of this debt-devoted topic, and it shows the external debt as percentage of GDP of types of countries. You don't quite clearly see this. The first is Europe advanced. The second bar is the emerging Eurozone. Sorry, Europe. The third is United States, and here is the last one is sorry. This is Latin America, and this is the advanced economies. And you see that the Latin America was actually very sharply deleveraging in the last 6 years. So Latin American countries were very serious about going out of the debt spiral and actually have results in this regard, unlike the developed Europe and unlike the Eurozone, United States, and so on. And just to remind, all those countries up here are the countries which have high level of human development and high level environmental footprint. Of course, this is not direct causality, but is a correlation that should be analyzed as well. Oh, sorry, once more. I think it's this is the total public and private outstanding debt of the United States. It's interesting. Why? Because we have here 1926, 13, with the first year of the banking crisis. This is the moment in 1933, the suspension of the gold standard clause, and then again we're following the same pattern in 2006. Do you remember what happened roughly here? It was the Second World War. I'm not frightening you, but simply there is something which somebody mentioned that in fact what we are paying in the case of Greece is the future peace in Europe. I mean, I would take it seriously. This is something which you cannot read, but I thought I should show you this. It is a photo of an advertisement which I saw in the streets of Bratislava. It was all over the place, which says it was done in 2009, after the first implication of the financial crisis, Lehman Brothers, bailout, and so on. Still something was not going on. Well, and it says, loan, no registration, no guarantee, up to 30,000 euros. Already, also for unemployed, employed, unemployed, retired, individual entrepreneurs, just call our free line. It was that desperate because I did it for two purposes. It actually replicates the mechanism of the mortgage crisis in the US, when everybody who could take loan already had taken it and there was needed something else, so who could take more and more. And this is the same in the case of the Eurozone. But the interesting thing here is this. Do you see this? Yes. And this is the reason why I took this picture of this, not of anything else, because there is a latent resistance to this. If it is not channeled, it is taking the form of possibly radical, aggressive, whatever, racism, you name it, anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism, and so on. And the combination of this irresponsible attitude to debt management and fueling the economies on debt with this is the message where I want to stress your attention. Sorry to say, but we're all debt junkies. Why? Because this is a very easy example. What happens when the country, the economy, or a household, in this case, there is no difference, gets into this debt crisis? You simply are getting just like on drugs. Just imagine, you have nominal GDP of 100,000 billion, 1 trillion, and 10% of annual growth, which is pretty reasonable if you have 5% real growth and 5% inflation. And you have aggregate private debt level of 1.250 billion, which is growing at 20% per year. It is roughly the same as the debt trends which I showed you right now. Which means that in 1 year you have a debt increase of 250 billion. Then the total spending in the economy, which spending means what could be the basis of effective demand, what I mentioned before. In order to keep you employed, the demand should be there. So the spending which will be keeping you employed is 1.250 trillion, which means 80% the incomes, the GDP, and 20% from debt. You're following, right? Simple. Then, 1 year later, the GDP grows by 10% to 1.1 trillion. And if the debt stabilizes, because the debt also rises, at this point, the total spending would be what? It will be 1.1 trillion, which means that it will be 150 billion less than the previous year. So any attempt not to decrease, but even to freeze the debt is already putting you in a downward spiral in terms of financing. And this is why I think it is really representing the drug dependency. And in fact, stabilization of debt causes 20% fall of nominal aggregated demand. With all others being equal, it means 20% less jobs or 12% less incomes if you want to repair the jobs and balance the equation, decreasing the salaries and the incomes. It's a very simple example, mechanical to a certain extent, because much more complex, of course. You have internal these different stratas in the labor market. You have the transition from manufacturing to services. Different sectors react differently, but the logic is generally holds true. This is a macroeconomic feature of falling into a debt trap or debt narco dependency. It's not just that we are junkies, but we are producing junk. Why? And this is my another obsession, that our role as consumers, which in economic theory is supposed to be the starting point for the economic cycle through our demand, we vote with our dollars, euros, whatever. The producers respond to our demand and produce more goods and services, improving our lives. This is the logic. It has been already reverted a long time ago. Because we have now something different. We have patriotic duty to shop, to keep the economy running, to keep ourselves employed, and given the debt financing, to shop even more so that we can, on one hand, retain the level of the demand, but also we need to have resources to pay for the cost of the debt, so interest rate, which we have to pay on the debt. And this is possible only in one option, because, again, going back to the case of the United States with the mortgage crisis, when everybody has their homes, what can we do? So build a bigger home. When everybody has one car in the family, so what do? Go and have another car. So 2 cars in a family. What will happen when we have 2 cars in the family? Maybe go for a helicopter. I don't know. So, but this is again, this is the entire logic of the expanding. This is the funnel. But the funnel, which yesterday Laszlo was saying, was diverted into the different direction. So you have increasing pressure on demand, supply, but with a decreasing value of resources. Here you have the inverted funnel. You have the increasing pressure of supply and demand, which is needed to drive the entire exercise and entire mechanism, which can be only expansionist. And it is expansionist because of the skewed definition of normality. And I think this is a psychological aspect of this which is totally disregarded or doesn't deserve sufficient attention. I mean, this is maybe this is definitely part of the human nature. We get used to the status we have, and the normality is seen as gradual increase. So if something does not increase, we psychologically perceive it as decline. So in order to feel comfortable as static and stable, we need to have a constant increase. And in economic terms, it in fact translates into the logic that bigger is better, and the bigger is normal. So big today, bigger tomorrow is part of our day's life. To a certain extent, this is the point from which our evolution started. This is not feature of the animal or biological world. They are very static in this regard. But human beings are very much expansionist, and that's why we have colonized the planet and we have the dominating the role of the dominating species. But the problem is here that at a certain point, exactly thanks to the debt spiral and the debt dependency, we are converting the goods and services from means to an end. And we know that, in theory, the growth in the goods and services are the means to expand people's potential to be and to do as human beings. And this is the so-called commodity functionality chain. So we have commodities, different goods, which have certain functionality, which improve, expand our capabilities. But in reality, what we have now is we actually resources devoted to commodities which create garbage. And this is the chain which I think is increasingly dominating our culture and our planet. And now I will show you just a few illustrations. This is from my own country. I'm from Bulgaria. And this is the case of my home city, Sofia, the capital. It is not perhaps unique, but it's a very nice place, but it doesn't have recycling facilities. So the garbage is another my obsession. This is the garbage field. And since it is roughly 2 million people, you can imagine that the amount of garbage generated is rather huge. And what the city management has invented is bailing the garbage. So they invested, no, it's serious. They invested into bailing facility in which garbage is bailed in bales, like banks. I find this metaphor quite appealing. And it is stored for better times, for the time when they No, I really don't want to amuse you, but this is true. This is reality, and the pictures were taken last year. And stored for better times when there will be garbage processing facility. Those are the bills, and they are stored either on some former industrial sites which are not used, or just on the garbage field. That's how they look, those bales. From the road, and this is, yes, it does. And just look at the shape. I find this also very, very interesting. Does it resemble you the bee hive? Because this is the most efficient shape in which you can store the maximum value. Originally they were rounded, but somehow the nature put its imprint, and it gradually puts the issues in the right place. And of course, gradually the nature gets hold of this, and there are some green shots of this. That's how they look closer. Somebody asked, do they smell? Yes, because it is in the open air, and this mud here is a bit sticky. And this is my favorite picture. I think this is perfect replication or replacement of our beehive spectacles. And the nature taking hold. So why I'm showing this? Because we have opened the natural cycle. Nature doesn't know, you know this, nature doesn't know the concept of garbage. There's no garbage in nature. And we are the first who created the concept of garbage. The concept of garbage means that you are taking out of the biological or environmental resources cycle certain elements and just store it, exactly like the garbage stored for better times. Or you are creating different elements which did not exist. For example, yesterday we were talking about the nitrogen cycle, which was exactly industrial technology, which was replicating to a certain extent natural phenomena, but in tremendously more effective way, producing the bound nitrogen used for fertilizing. Others, like plastics and other chemicals which also don't exist, which we don't know exactly what are their long-term implications. There was a lot of clips on YouTube. One of the comedians was, you can show actually, after that, joking, maybe this is our destiny as human beings to come and invest plastic. That's why we are here, and that's why we have to pollute it. I don't know. But the point is that we are changing, and we are looking at the entire way the ecosystems work. And when yesterday Laszlo was talking about these natural boundaries, this is the new concept that just now starts getting hold and being part of this massive thinking on that. But the bigger problem, again, coming back from economic perspective, is that running garbage production on debt is in fact the nature of the economic crisis, because in fact what we are doing is spending money we don't have, because we have borrowed them, to buy things which we don't need, or which we need for a very limited period of time, and then throw it away, not just because they have become obsolete or not needed anymore. Simply we are bound to do this by the economic logic, because otherwise everything will collapse. The entire economic system will collapse, we get unemployed, so better go and shop. And I think this is a major problem, because in fact what it is resulting is converting the planet, in fact it's our children's resource, into garbage production and manipulation facility, creating the jobs in between. The interesting thing is that it does make perfect economic sense from totally GDP perspective. But I think it's a rhetorical question. I don't need to ask you, does it make sense from human development and sustainable development perspective? And here is the formula which we were discussing yesterday. The impact number of population by consumption and technologies. In fact, I would tend to modify this formula, the population by the number of garbage it generates, and technology which can be used. The technology issue is a separate topic which maybe we will have to discuss it in the next rounds of the courses, because there is now very huge hype about technologies, new technologies, green technologies, saving the planet, and so on and so forth. The real problem in my view is that technology is again just a tool, exactly like economic growth is just a tool, and unless you have the bigger picture in which you can position, locate, and evaluate the technologies, I mean, they can be really, really very dangerous. I'm personally very concerned about ideas of geoengineering as one of the options to save our planet and ourselves. But let's not go into this. My point is that technology element can be both a benefit and a huge risk. What do we have next? Just three quick illustrations. That's how our planet was and our relationship to the planet was before the 90s. You don't see the picture. Just a set of weights. Roughly at the end of the 90s, we were balanced. We were consuming resources so that the planet can regenerate itself. Roughly from the 2002, I mean, it's very difficult to estimate, but of course there are plus a certain magnitude of error. But roughly in 2002, we are overshooting, and in fact we are now consuming between 1/3 of the resources, more than the planet is able to regenerate, both resources and to absorb the stocks in terms of garbage and our impact on the planet. Different projections say that around 2050 we will be needing maybe 2 planets. Is it 1.5? Is it 2.5? 3? I mean, it doesn't matter because in fact we will have one, unless, and this is serious, we manage to colonize Mars or something else. No. This is not a joke, and I will show you a book I brought, The Future of Science, which actually is trying to project the technological breakthroughs and in the future how it can be shaping up. And this is one of the options for the next 100 years. People are taking it seriously. I don't, but some are. This is where we would like to be, but we don't know how. And now, the big question to me, the dominating economic model, can it take us there? And this is a summary of the two dominating paradigms. Tomorrow we'll be talking about environmental economics. This is just an introduction to tomorrow's lecture. But on the left side you have the classical economic model, and on the right side features of the ecological focus, the ecological sensitive economic model. And if you look at them, it's not just that they are opposing, but they're simply very different. The classical is very linear, so we're going from point A to point B. And the task is to just trace the direction and just go and execute. Maximization of profit, of output is a leading element. Competition is a driving force in this regard. It's very top-down, so you have mechanisms which are implementing decision-making. It's very globalized, standardizing, technocratic, technocentric, and energy-based, and I would say garbage generating. The ecological, on the other hand, is very different because, of course, some of those elements, it's not just two opposing worlds, but the logic is really different. It's cyclical, so it's not linear. So we need to be aware of the cycles, not just financial and economic cycles, which I was mentioning in terms of debt crisis, but also in terms of the cycles of resources. It's very cooperative, so it's based on cooperative action. That's why it's very much localized and community-centered. That's why it's also bottom-up, so it's not centralized government which deliver the services and deliver the input, but it's based on the activities of the local communities. It's diversity-oriented instead of standardizing and reductionist. It's very holistic and homeostatic, ecocentric in nature. So it tends to see the linkages between all the elements. And it's information and database in terms of knowledge. And simply, the concept of garbage is alien to this. It's a non-concept. So how to move from this classic approach to the ecological is a big question. I think it's a big challenge. One of the elements of this is just knowing. And it's, when I say classic, it is not the new classic or the new liberal models. I mean, they're very much different but complementary. It's just the point that traditional economists think this way. And what is very important, if you look at the readings on that, the metaphors with which the different phenomena are described are very interesting. Usually the classic are borrowing from physics, because they're very mechanical and linear. And the metaphors used in the ecological are usually taken from biology. The very concept of homeostasis is from biology and so on. So what are the implications beyond the economy? And this is, we're gradually moving to the political mechanisms and representativity. So first of all, there is a huge growth of relativity. Of economic value, and you know, fluctuation of the markets, Dow Jones goes up, goes down, market capitalization up, down. I mean, you totally cannot follow this, and I would say normal people or just the guy on the street could say, oh my God, what's going on? Am I rich or am I poor? And the answer is depends. Let's see how was that. Now you are rich, but tomorrow you may be poor, or the other way around. But there is a fundamental contradiction which you usually tend to oversee. And this everything is okay. Of course, since 1971, actually, 15th of August, we are totally detached the anchor from any absolute value anchor. But the problem is that the relativity of economic value is contradicting the absolute nature of basic human values. So, from human development and sustainable development perspective, you cannot say, well, I'm relatively alive. Or my children have relatively 3 children. Or, you know, there is a shift. You can be relatively healthy or less healthy, but the fundamental value of health is absolute. You value health, period. You don't value maybe to a certain extent health, but you know, my left leg can be, but my right is okay. So, and this is, I think, a contradiction which is not addressed yet. So how to reconcile the relative nature of economic value and markets with the absolute nature of human development values. And the anchoring is also another problem, which made possible all this financial explosion mechanisms, fancy financial instruments, and so on. Because until the exit of the United States during Nixon administration from the last stage of this golden standard period, there was an anchor. Since then, everything is totally irrelevant. And I think this is one of the other fundamental implications for today's lives, both political and civil society, because at individual levels, it contributes to extremely high level of insecurity. Normally, people tend to have certain expectations of stability. I have a house and I have it. This glass of beer is a glass of beer, and you cannot say, well, yesterday it costs $1, but maybe tomorrow, depending on the markets, it go to $2, or maybe it go to 5 cents. This is a level of insecurity and instability results in different patterns of behavior, both political and non-political level. And the issue of value, this is a link to the financial markets, is another fundamental problem which we are facing now, because with the collapse of old communist system and the market-based dominance, there was a pendulum shift in that regard. So there are two schools of thought of the origin and the nature of economic value. One is total relativism, that value is relative, but the other is that it has certain material or other anchors. So we move from one extreme, in our region at least, of understanding the value in absolute terms, to totally other extreme that it is totally relative. And I took this quote after the beginning of the financial crisis, which is describing the UK's dependence on financial services. Do you wonder why the UK is so opposing any financial tax or any reduction of the scope of the freedom of the financial industry? Because it's a huge money-making enterprise. Roughly 20% of cross-border bank lending is in the UK, and roughly 14% of the UK GDP in 2007 was coming from financial services and associated services. And the real question is, to what extent those services were actually contributing to the improvement of people's lives. I don't say real economy, because I'm not that extremist. I don't say, no, financial markets should be closed down. But definitely, part of those financial markets are simply parasiting on the real economy. It's not just me who is saying this. This is a quote from Lord Turner, who is used to be the chairman of the UK Financial Services Authority, which says in 2009 that the city has grown beyond a reasonable size, accounting for too much of rich output and taking away too many of the country's brightest graduates. Parts of its services are socially useless. Means to name something socially useless is a more elegant way to say that actually all this job creation exercise in the so-called city was a very lucrative, very high paid nothing. But nothing from output result theory, it was highly expensive, because you cannot just invent value. You need either to take it from the future generations, or you need to take it from the existing savings and so on. Coming back to the commodity functionality and capability change, I believe that a radical paradigm shift is necessary in that regard. And what we're having now is just make-up of the existing systems, and it leads us nowhere. And I think there is gradually increasing understanding that the financial system itself is a major problem. It's not part of the solution. There are steps in the regulation of this financial system which are very good. There are steps of decoupling of the investment banking from traditional commercial banking. But I think we are still far from there. And I think it is politically risky to say, listen guys, we have gone too far, and this is simply just redistributing value generated elsewhere, or borrow from different instruments through different mechanisms from the future generation, and that's it. Simply get out. And perhaps there are too many invested interests in that. But I hope we are getting there slowly. And this is, I think, important. We still don't perceive the economic crisis as an opportunity. It's still primarily a problem. And unless we do this as an opportunity, I think we are not getting far. And for me, the interesting question from the today's perspective is, are the existing political systems up to these challenges? And my answer is no. I very briefly say why. Very sketchy, Laurent, correct me if I'm wrong. But what is democracy about? Basically about two things. In terms of mechanisms, it's about legitimating by popular vote, persuading the voters, and peaceful transition of power. In terms of decision making, it's about delegation of decision making and redistributing managing of public resources. Very crudely. We, as voters, delegate the right to decide to people who can do this on our behalf. In most cases, this is about my taxpayer-generated revenues. In the process of the transition, we have lost something which is called the left-right dichotomy. There is a quote, I don't remember the name, but I slightly reformulated. Originally it was nothing is right on the left and nothing is left on the right. But I think the correct message should be nothing is left on the left and nothing is right on the right. Because the left just vanished. I mean, nobody dares to say, hey, listen, there is a fundamental problem in labor-capital relations. Oh, there is exploitation. Oh, there is... No, we're all market-based and we're all fundamentalists. And what has replaced this dichotomy is, on the one hand, you have decline in grand social engineering schemes. So before we had communism, which was built the entire history in the making, changing. Come on, this was to many people exciting. Now, I would say the last social engineering perhaps remained the EU project with this euro. So we'll see how it shapes up. Maybe it will share the destiny of the other social engineering attempts. But from my personal perspective as an observer in the last 20 years the development in our region, I think we have gone from ideology-driven to show-based-driven politics. Have you noticed how important became all this marketing, show business style of politics? Think about this. To what extent the message, the value of the message has been shrinking and declining. And another issue, just think what is structuring the debates. Do you feel that there is a bigger picture in these debates? I personally don't, and I think this is a major problem in that regard. I mentioned communism. I think we can blame the communist period for a lot of things, and the major thing which I think it should be openly blamed is that it was an attempt to forcefully implement a sustainable social construct, but in the meantime it discredited very sound and reasonable concepts because they started being associated with the communist period. Namely, exploitation. Communists talk about exploitation. Come on. Labor rights. What labor rights? Labor unions. What kind? Social justice, solidarity. You can extend the list. Most of those are either unpopular or politically suicidal. Look at what's going on in the US presidential campaign. So I certainly find myself either as some kind of dinosaur from the old epoch or something wrong, fundamentally wrong. And the pendulum swing, which was associated with the collapse of communism, in fact, the bad communism legitimized any other alternative as morally just. So, as long as you are not claiming to be against exploitation, you do everything you want. And there was also fundamental detachment from some basic values in terms of, for example, acceptability of corruption. Why should be corruption not acceptable? It's simply market mechanism. It's a mechanism through which you can improve the pricing of the services you are supposed to. So, of course, I'm exaggerating, but the logic is very dangerous in that regard. Another problem, there is a quote, nobody can give you as much as I can promise you. I like this because it is unfortunately very often related to the current politics. And I don't say that politicians are responsible for that. We all are very eager to believe and to trust what we want to be trusted. We want to be cheated. Let's admit this. The electorate loves to be cheated and votes for those who will promise as much as anybody else, as more. And this is on the one hand related to the relativity of wealth, but also it is related to the ritualization of politics. I mean, it has become more daily or regular ritual. You go, you vote, you cast your ballot, but in so-called mature democracies, you see the decline in political activism and the increasing level of skepticism. It's only the people who are just entering this free democratic exercise experience who are idealistically hopeful about that. And it is also related to the rise of political technologies and marketing. In the, for example, former Soviet Union countries, it is explicitly, you have NGOs and companies for political marketing and political technologies. So, come on, it's a little bit exaggeration. And the point here is that the political message is following the logic of the traditional market product. You have a positioning exercise, you market this, you target the audience, and so on. What was the logic of the market? What is the output of this? Unfortunately, in my view, it's very often in politics as well. And I think there are some fundamental cracks in the traditional political mechanisms. First of all, detachment of the political consequences from the policy decisions and actions. This is very, very natural and very logical because it follows this gaps in terms of timing. You decide now, you take the decision now, but the real implications are after the next electoral cycle. Simply you are out of the office. You go run on debt today, improve the living standards of your constituency so that you are voted, but the real implications of the debt is when the debt is maturing, and usually it's maturing in the long run. Or you go and do a grand job creation exercise, building dam or something else, and then you retire, but the implication for the environment comes 10 or 15 years later. And this is actually very similar to the mechanism in the financial sector, because it is very easy to manipulate. The results, the financial outcomes, you go, get the bonus, and 5 years later somebody says, oh my God, but Enron actually is already drained long ago. Fracturing with big constituencies is another problem. So we don't have big constituencies anymore because we are multiple identities, and the traditional, this is again going back to the left and right dichotomy, labor versus capital. What does it mean, labor? There is something, it is very bad to be exploited, but there is something worse than being exploited, not being exploited. In today's world, this is a really concept which needs to be redefined and somehow reformulated. And the outcomes of the real politics. Sometimes this is a little bit provocative, but sometimes when you look at the level of macro outcomes in terms of efficiency of policy making, in terms of long-term results, I have the feeling that it is beyond ideologies. And we often are facing democratic mechanisms which are not delivering what they pretend and what they hope to deliver, what we hope to deliver. Let's not be pessimistic. I mean, this is a list of issues which I think should be taken into consideration in the bigger picture. Because otherwise, we don't understand why actually the governments and the EU institutions are not capable of addressing, for example, the debt crisis or something else. And there are some interesting developments. On the one hand, we have dilution of national level politics. So it is moving into two poles. One is local level politics and another is supranational politics. To what extent decision making at national level governments matter? For example, yes, Holland or Netherlands or Finland can veto, but on the bigger issues, a very large number of decision making prerogatives have shifted from the national governments. And in fact, I find this trend very, very, very important, and it could be one of these green shows. The party politics, traditional party politics is formulated and constructed around the constituencies which are not there in many cases. We have new social media, we have new opportunities for mobilization and manipulation, by the way. The role of politically oriented or politically misused media is tremendous. So how do you reinvent the party systems with the caucuses, with the party structures in different population, and reconcile with dynamic world of internet, social networks, and so on? So there is something new going on. And the question of how. Is it another revolution which is in the making? Is it a Gandhi style of resistance or boycott of traditional mechanisms? Many people are doing this, just not going to vote. Many people are casting their votes explicitly as a protest vote just to mark to deliver the message that they are simply against austerity. Look at Italy, the new party of this actor, comedian. This is really amazing, and it actually puts into question the traditional mechanisms which in a country as Italy have been in place all over the place for the last decades. Or is it all of the above? Yesterday was a lecture on the Arab Spring, so is it another revolution? Is it a boycott of traditional mechanisms? Or is it something else? I don't even mention the issue of radicalization and so on. And the bigger question is, how are the existing political systems responding to those challenges? Because there are two ways actually, either to adjust and somehow reflect the challenges through internal modification, and which is in fact related to the high level of political decision making, or just wait and try to dilute the energy and drain it. It's in many countries like Russia, for example, or attempts in Egypt before the revolution, the same. So it is different from country to country, from culture to culture. But it doesn't make the question, is at the end of party politics less relevant? Let me come with a few conclusions and hopefully start the discussion. So first of all, I think we should be clear. We are not facing financial crisis or not even economic crisis. I think the more fundamental crisis is the crisis of values and political mechanisms. Financial and economic aspects are important, but the solutions are in the values and political mechanisms. And we are not there yet, I think, I'm afraid. Second, the underpinning philosophy, first jobs, incomes, and everything else later is wrong. We have seen this not just in the last year, but in the entire history of debts and economic bubbles and busts. The debt, running of debt is a dead-end stream. Decoupling from the debt is painful. It is really like drug addiction therapy. And you can be very cautious and try not to inflict pain, but at the end of the day, at some point you have to. And not admitting this is simply politically irresponsible. And again, I'm afraid we are far from there. Simply governments are not up to the task to say, listen, a fundamental shift is necessary. It's not about increasing debt indefinitely. The problem is that we live in a market economy, and the parameters tend to reflect demand and supply, also in politics. And I think this is the last important message. The demos, its characteristic, its culture, its ideas, its values, determines the kratos, the way power is being executed. It's not the other way around. The other way around was the attempts of the communist system. When you have elitarian party politics, imposed vision, imposed project, and you discipline the constituencies. But they were not constituents, they were just subjects. In our society, the type of the cultures dominating and values dominating the societies is determining the entire political mechanism's outcomes. And that's why investing in human capabilities, knowledge, responsibility, awareness of the bigger picture which is missing is so important. It's not just important about sustainable development and the links to human development. It's important for the very sustainability of the political mechanisms and the future governance mechanisms. I think that's it. Questions, comments, disagreements? Please. Thank you. Yes? Hello.
May I react because, first of all, I'm very glad that there is a growing recognition that it is about politics. It is about politics. In the 80s and the 90s, this economy is stupid. Everyone was using that word. Now, we realize it's about politics. With bad politics, you have a crisis of confidence and of governance, as that you described. It's not only financial look at the cycle, political cycles after the Second World War, you will see that what we are facing now in terms of the governance crisis or the governance debate took place also in the 70s within the universities in Paris, Berkeley, a new recognition of the necessity to find a reconciliation between society, people, and economy. I think what we are facing today is a kind of natural end of a cycle which was very much conditioned by the existence of the Soviet Union. The existence of the Soviet Union was a kind of conditioning factor impeding capital to behave in a very primitive, non-regulated manner as happened in the 90s. The existence of the Soviet Union conditioned a lot of the left within Western Europe, the Social Democrats. I was a Social Democrat. We were very much the left in Western Europe, and we were in between. We were between, the rights believing in the sacredcy of capitalism, and the communists really believing that it's all about, political engineering. In the 90s, the quote that you got is from the 90s, what is left for the left. There was a big debate. And what is left of the left at that time was answered by the left through the third way, given, conceptualizing the necessity to have a reconciliation between social democracy and the economy. We were blamed at that time, and you remember that, for being spenders. We were spending money through the welfare state. We were very good spenders, demand-driven, social protection, not taking into account employment rates, the mounting public debt at that time. And we were, in that sense, I think very naive. We thought that the way to respond to those new challenges was to privatize a huge public sector, deregulate the financial markets, and create what the city of London is today, a monster in some extent. A monster in the extent that it cannot be controlled, regulated by political forces, and because it's not elected by anyone, CEOs are not elected, they are not accountable to people. And I am very positive and I am very optimistic because there is a growing recognition that this cannot work in the long term. And there is a growing recognition outside Europe. If you look at the increased civic participation of people in politics in Latin America during the last decade, they got out of the traditional political parties, but they didn't get out of politics. And that brings me to, I think, the very fundamental thing that we need to keep in mind. There are two things. One is politics and one is the political. Politics is always there. People are debating with each other, have opinions, do have divergent interests. And the political is about peacefully resolving those conflicting interests. That's the basic thing about democracy. A peaceful reconciliation and resolution of conflict. And it is in Europe today where I think this new type of politics will have to be translated in a new political thing at the European level, at the national level, at the local. I'm not that pessimistic. I think we are facing a cycle. I think the cycle is continued by a much more complex factor than 2 decades ago. We cannot we cannot, and then I'm going to finish. I think the society today is much more complex than 2 or 3 decades ago. And it's up to people like us to try to analyze the complexity because of globalization, because of the diversity of society, because of the multicultural societies in Western Europe, and so on and so on. But it's up to people like us to analyze the complexity of the world in which we live, and to reinvent again the political. And I think it's already taking place outside our experience.
Thank you, Laura. Actually, I hope I was not pessimistic. I was trying to be a little bit provocative to take you out of the box. I agree with you that we maybe are facing the end of a cycle. Actually, what I think we lost in this process is the idea of checks and balances, because it was very, very dominant in our transition, pre-transition. I wouldn't say oppositional thinking, but also oppositional thinking in the entire region. But also, it is very part of the political sciences thinking of the 70s and 80s. And now I have lost it. And when I was saying that at a certain point, at outcome level, you see striking similarities between different ideological systems' outcomes, it's exactly that. Because the previous communist system was totally sterile in terms of checks and balances. Where are the checks and balances now? Who is checking and balancing the banking system? Who is checking and balancing the decision-making process at the European Union level? I mean, this is a problem for me. And just running on the assumption that we are better than those before us is not sufficient. Look at the liver scandal, which is now evolving in the UK. I find it totally amazing example. It's very limited in terms of thematic scope, but it is indicative. When you don't have these checks and balances, people simply are starting to exploit the system, and the insiders' vested interest, and in fact the entire system is collapsing. So to me, the new challenges of the politics and policies exactly reinventing mechanisms for checks and balances, which will be integrated into the existing new levels and new mechanisms of voice, accountability, and political participation. It cannot. Otherwise, we are facing the risk of running parallel universes. One is the informality through social media, SMS, organization, and the other is the ritual politics with huge resources in terms of redistributing taxpayers' money. How to bring them together so that the one level is capable of influencing the other, and the other benefiting from the other is to me an open question.
That's right. I think this is not that difficult. If you look at the cycles in history, after the Second World War, you had a cycle which started in the 40s with public institutions, Bretton Woods, national welfare states, a social contract between capital and labor, certainly within Europe, but also outside Europe. Nasser in Egypt was also a social contract. In Latin America, you had the populist movement. After the 50s and the 60s, there came up an increase of social demands because of Berkeley, because of late 68, a radicalization of society, which led to revolutions in Latin America, revolutions in Africa, a Cold War. And that ended with the election of Thatcher in the 70s, Reagan in 79, the collapse of the oil economies, the wars in the Middle East, and the end of the Soviet Union in 1989. And then you had actually 2 decades, between 1989 and now, 2008, 2 decades, in my opinion, in a transition from one century to the next one. I think we are facing now, from 2008, the beginning of the 21st century. And in that sense, I'm following Eric Hobsbawm. I hope you know who Eric Hobsbawm is. You don't know Eric Hobsbawm? Eric Hobsbawm is a British historian, and I think the greatest historian in the 20th century. He's already dead, but he had his analysis of the short and the long centuries. And I think we are facing since 2006, actually, at the beginning of the 21st century, which is complex, no paradigms, as you were saying. It is obscure in some sense. And we will have to redefine the politics and the political. And in some things, we will have to recuperate power. We lost power in the last 2 decades. That's why the financial markets are behaving the way they're behaving. We didn't think, really, the political class didn't think that we were giving that power to that Greek people. Greed was not part of our culture. People would react, they would behave in a kind of moderation of activity.
Yes, but that is a fundamental problem. They were giving the power to themselves. It was inherently conflict of interest inside the political elite.
Yeah, but no, but you cannot nowadays. Another fantastic and excellent idea is this two-thirds society, the German Zweidrittel Gemeinschaft. The globalization will make it possible for two-thirds parts of the society to go with it, to win, to get money with it, to adapt itself. One-third are the losers of globalization. And there is a one-third losing the globalization within Europe. And you cannot tell this one-third not making part of social mobility, not being part of the upper middle classes, that you are going to diminish the social demand. We live in a democracy. Really? You have to take into account that one-third of
okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
I agree with both of you. You come from different views, but I think there are things that are historically missing that will help us draw the gap between your debate and his debate. There is a gap in the issue of the oil dependence and a cycle with debt. Whenever there is an oil boom, there will always be a debt crisis. The 70s oil boom, the debt crisis in the 80s. I think there is a need to add it to the debate. Then the issue of the political elite, the reckless spending of George Bush in his own personal agenda, regime change in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and also Pakistan. It was a reckless spending of the elite, which was part of the crisis we are in here. Then the issue of business groups being in control of oil. OPEC has really lost control of the power to control oil. It's more in the hands of the speculators, the bankers. Then after this step, now where will the European crisis get to? Because after saving the banks, you now have developed the vulture funds, vulture financing, which we experienced in Africa, where people buy over the sovereign debts of the people and speculate about it. Because even I've heard that people have already started speculating with Greece. If Greece gets out of the Eurozone, then we'll make money from it. And this will definitely make the markets go in and collapse more and more. Then the issue of investing for peace. There is usually a link between war, economics and war. Before the World War I, the World War II, there was depression before the wars. Then equally the conflict of, then also, are we now transitioning to the issue of the Third World War? If US collapses, Europe collapses, is the world transiting to a Third World War? So I think that should be where the future look should be. If all the great wars we've had inclinations to economic and political crisis, is the world heading for a Third World War? Thank you.
Okay, I wouldn't go that far. I don't think we are there yet. The entire world collapsing and Third World War. I think we have learned something in the last 50 years. The point is, let's not rule out by default any scenarios. It is possible. It is one of the possible options. Very highly improbable at all, but it is possible. And unless we have this taken into consideration in our modeling, it will be a little bit of the picture. In terms of Greece, we were discussing this in the morning. Actually, I wouldn't say that we are paying for the peace. It is a normal, typical example of hostage-taking. It's simply very easy to take a rich country of the entire Eurozone hostage, because the cost of not paying the ransom are much higher than the ransom itself. So this, we can say, well, it's not just, it is not moral, but on the other hand, we should not be looking at this just from one-sided perspective. German economy was one of those benefiting from the debt spiral in Greece. The entire idea of running trade surplus, just not being absolutely cautious where the money would come from, is a little bit strange. So you cannot expect having the benefits of an open economy in exchange, but not being aware of that this can come at a cost. The bailing out of Greek banks, to what extent this was bailing out of Greek banks or the German and French bank exposure in Greece? So it is much more complicated than it is perceived, or we tend to perceive it reading the news coverage, because also the news coverage is also often manipulated. Of course, there is no doubt the Greek society has lived a long time beyond its means, but it is not the only reason why we are now in this situation. So there are much more actors which are in this boat, and unless we say openly that it's not just the Greek consumer that were drinking their metaxa and laying on the beach, we simply again will be going to another extreme, which is equally wrong as any extreme. Of course, I agree with you on the oil dependency and related debt crisis. I would say that the oil dependency leads to debt crisis much. It is intermediated by the governance mechanisms and particularly state capture, resources capture, corruption, and so on. So oil dependency and oil resources per se are not the evil itself. It's the way they are being used by local elites and corrupt politicians is part of the problem. And it's also part of the solution in order to address those problems. I think that's it.
I
Please.
just want to add to what my colleague said. I think what should be considered in terms of this crisis and what had not been the issue with the previous financial currency crisis is the new global actor such as China, which has now such huge reserves of foreign assets, which can bail out, I think, not only Greece but the whole Europe and the US. And this is funny and not funny at the same time, because China represents not very traditional democracy, or let's say the politically correct way. So it might be not just economic challenge, but also a political challenge. And I think when analyzing the future possibilities, we should take into consideration the possible rearrangement of political powers, which might follow.
Yes, I agree with you. This is also, I must admit, when we're talking about the collapse of communism, I mean, this is intellectual shortcut. The collapse of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. There are few countries which, and it is not just North Korea, which has retained the monoparty system and simply adopted it. And China is adopting a totally different model of transforming itself from the old communist traditional monoparty rigid political system to something different. Still monoparty, but trying to introduce certain elements, again, checks and balances within the party system and within the party mechanism. I would say party internal democracy, it's part from democracy, but certainly party management mechanisms. How it will succeed? Well, let's see, in the long run. I would say that the issue of legitimacy at a certain point will be on the agenda in China as well as it was in Central and Eastern Europe. We already can see that the gradual evolutionary type of challenge of transformation could bring more benefits in the long run than the revolutionary just cutting the system and dismantling overnight. The point is, could it be otherwise? I had a friend, a colleague in Russia, political scientist, and we were discussing many times this Chinese Russian experience, and asking the question, okay, why couldn't this happen in a different way? His answer was very simple: because we are Russians, we're not Chinese. It's very simple. And this is No, but this is fundamentally important issue because it matters in terms of culture, in terms of history, in terms of style of mentality. It's a lot of other things which we really don't tend to factor in. As regards debts, of course, but there is a trick. It is again linked to market capitalization. The value of the debt is very much linked to the fact that you don't go and exercise your right to claim it back. The moment when any holder of the debt would like to have it paid back, it's very meaningful to decline, really. There was, again, with some of the economic journals, speculation of how much China could shop if it starts spending its debt. Doing a very, very simple primitive exercise, having the real estate prices now and the value, the nominal value of the debt which China holds, and just calculate maybe half of Manhattan, 2/3 of the city, blah blah blah. Okay, but we know it doesn't work the way. The moment when it goes into even hinting such excuse intention, it will dramatically shift the proportion. And this is actually another illustration why the issue of debt is much more complicated than we tend to see. We tend still to perceive it in absolute values, which is not. It's all very relative. And maybe this is part of the optimistic message. So every stick has two sides. Please.
Well, thank you. Well, I have a question which I want to club with the previous lecture. And it's a very small question, is that what is the implication of economic crisis in democratic governance?
Now.
Yeah.
I try to, you have the democratic governance of UNDP, and you have the democratic governance of each of the countries in the region. The influence of the crisis for the democratic governance is that now we are making this analysis, a global report analyzing issues like what is the influence of the Chinese thinking on democratic governance structure. And we have a debate within the UN and the UNDP. What is democratic governance today? Because the world has changed. New actors are coming up. Traditional thinking about liberal representative democracy. Those in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and North America are not always working as they should. So we are thinking, why are they not working as they should? So the economic crisis is being used, as Andrey said, as a moment in history which is beyond the economy and finances. It is also about society, the states, public institutions. And it forces us to rethink and think about democratic governance. There are people and there are countries who want the UN and the UNDP not to involve itself in democratic governance because it is political. And they don't want the international community to involve itself in political sense. And I think and one of the things that was my presentation, we have a universal declaration on political rights and human rights, and we have to stick to it as an international community. And we have to, I think, go on. If countries are not respecting human rights and political rights, say to those countries, you are a signatory, you signed for it, and you have to stick to it, you have to respect it. A country is not a government. A country is its people, and its people are changing governance every day. It's not the government which is representing the country, it's the nation, the people. But how to reach the people? It's something that we as the government people are thinking about.
So when talking about how to reach the people, don't you think it's very important to identify the various actors that will be involved in the whole process?
Yes. We are asking our country offices to connect to civil society organizations. We are thinking about academics like you, people involved in social movements, how to involve them. We are going to open a website in September where we will ask questions to you, and we want to get answers from you. What do you think about democratic governance? What is democracy nowadays? What is the involvement of young people in traditional political parties? What do you expect from the political? Yes.
Do you also include into this discussion the issue of local government and decentralization actually, and how the decentralization, what is the impact of decentralization on the democracy and actually on development in the end?
Yes, we are looking at local governance actors and structures. We are looking at the reality of decentralization. Most of the so-called decentralization processes do not lead to decentralization of power. Deconcentration is something different. You give so-called authority to a municipality, but you don't give the municipality the resources.
That's
to the
right.
municipality. So how effective is the decentralization? We are looking at the effectiveness of formal and informal institutions. How effective are they in providing healthcare? How effective are they in providing education? How effective are they in securing access to information? We are using international covenants signed by countries, and we look at the countries, we look at the indicators, and we're going to make not a ranking, but we're going to explore to what extent these countries are fulfilling their obligations in the international community, and vis-à-vis all the citizens.
Okay, thank you. One last question, because you are eating your lunch break. Thank you for this interest, but just being aware. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I, frankly speaking, don't know whether it's a question or a remark, but I think about these a lot of different examples which you gave. For example, with the beer, which price is so volatile. And I remember myself when I just started to study economics. I was stuck for months, for first several months, because I couldn't understand the logic. For example, when the professor asked us, for example, how the price is determined, the obvious answer for me was, well, the object, the good, should have intrinsic value, yeah, maybe by cost of production. But that was the wrong answer. The right answer was price is determined by supply and demand. And a lot of things like that which seem to me very illogical. And I was struggling for months, but then my mind was broken, and I started to understand all this. So how do you think, how is education, what's the impact of education on this system?
I would say it's again a pendulum phenomenon. Perhaps you should have had in your course this example of the water and the diamond in terms of utility.
Yes.
So and difference in prices. So this is again an illustration of the extremes. So you cannot speak to one of the two extremes. They are both wrong. So there is mutual interaction and mutual complementarity between, on the one hand, utilitarianism, and on the other hand, austerity. So the answer is just sticking to common sense and not succumb to the simplistic schemes and explanations. And don't forget about the feedback loops in terms of individual mechanisms and processes. Okay, thank you very much. This is an opportunity for continuing the discussion. We'll definitely be coming back to some of the issues. As you see, we are trying not to speak to just competitive topics, but link different elements from different issues. So don't perceive it as the end of the political and social dimension of sustainability. We'll be referring to this tomorrow and the next
One thing, I'm leaving, I'm not going to be born here, but I'm coordinating this global report, and I would be very much interested in sending the group here an email, because what we want to know is what are the new expectations of people, leaders, people like you, and it would be very helpful for me if we could participate in this process. Okay. Thank you very much. So,
Thank you. One last announcement.